Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Tonight I have the honor and the pleasure of welcoming to Ideas in the Agora, Professor Giovanni Casadio from the University of Salerno. From time to time we shall probably switch to Italian and back because Professor Casadio is probably going to do that as well because we usually use both languages somehow freely. Professor Casadio has a long career behind him and in front of him. He is in Romania for the 100th time, I guess, if not more. He's a frequent visitor to this country for reasons that I cannot disclose. In any case, he has been around at least in the last 16, 17 years, and definitely maybe starting with that legendary Congress in the history of religion that was taking place in Bucharest in 2006, and which in fact created a kind of momentum for the history of religions in Romania. And one of its side effects is the creation of the Institute for the History of Religions of the Romanian Academy of Sciences, which is still up, the Academy and the Institute. So there were unintended consequences and then strategic developments following on from that particular meeting, which was extremely well attended, by the way, with the luminaries of the history of religions from the United States, Western Europe, and elsewhere.
France, by the way,
yes,
died just some months ago.
Yes.
A few months ago.
Yeah. And so from then on, he kept coming back for more, Professor Casadio. Now, he is, you find everything you want in the flyer here and, of course, on the internet. So I will not go into all the details of his career. But suffice it to say that he has been everywhere the history of religions over the last 3, if not more, decades has done something. From Ascona to all the other places in the world, especially in Western Europe, where history of religions is taught, studied, talked about, written, perhaps read. He is anyhow, he was a vice president of the European Association for the Study of Religions, secretary of the Società Italiana di Storia della Religione, a member of the American Academy of Religion, and life honorary member of the International Association for the History of Religions. A long, long career with main fields of study have been Dionysianism, Orphism, also in connection with Plato and Plutarch, Near Eastern mythology, ancient Gnosticism and Christianism, Manichaeism, ancient anthropology, and so on. He was, of course, a student of Ugo Bianchi, and this is how his biography first intersected the biography of Ioan Petru Culianu, who is let's say, the main topic of our discussion tonight. Very recently, from the 21st to the 23rd of October, in Iași, Culianu's native city, we had a colloquium on the life, work, and legacy in the plural of Ioan Petru Culianu, and Gabriel Bada here with us, and Giovanni Casadio were with us in this colloquium. So this is, in a way, a kind of natural and intended consequence of that colloquium. You know that, or you may know that outside of Romania, interest in the work, not life, in the work of Ioan Petru Culianu is most spectacular in Italy, where last year in 2021, this splendid special issue of the magazine Antares Prospettive Antimoderne was published with the title Ioan Petru Culianu, Argonauta della Quarta Dimensione, and it was edited by an Italian-Romanian trio, Roberta Moretti, Horia Corneliu Cicortaș, Andrea Scarabelli. I presented this in the Romanian press. I excerpted some parts of it, but there is also a kind of, how should I say, fluidity between this volume in Italian and these other volumes on Culianu. First of all, these two, which I edited in 2001, and you can find on the internet. They were the first attempt to cover more or less the various domains, the activity, the lives, the works of Ioan Petru Culianu in several languages. Some of the contributions here are simply tributes, do not discuss the life and work of Culianu, but they are dedicated to his memory. Most of the substance connected directly to Culianu in these two volumes, I republished in this Romanian volume, Ioan Petru Culianu, Omul și Opera. Now, my main interest in Culianu's work is coextensive with my own training as a humanist, because by an accident of fate, I happened to come of age in the same city where Culianu was born, and get close, and very close, very early, to his family, especially to his sister, Teresa Culianu Petrescu, to Dan Petrescu, her husband, and to the mother and aunt of Ioan Petru Culianu. This made it possible for me to not only read what Culianu was writing, starting more than 40 years ago, but also read what Culianu was reading. As I was not interested in the history of religions beyond a certain theoretical interest, which was more general and connected to, in general, to the theory of and history of the humanities. I was very interested in what Culianu was trying to bring to the history of religions, not in his works of erudition that much, although maybe in their footnotes and introductions already. And I was more interested in the suggestions, hypotheses, mistakes, far-fetched proposals of all sorts, ranging from the philosophy of history to the theory of the humanities, philosophy of science, literary theory, cultural theory of all sorts. So I was interested in these theoretical, historical, methodological, paradigmatic readings of culture that Culianu was interested in. And as I mentioned several times before, this was a way of access to the evolution of Culianu, because as I started early, the Culianu that I first read was the very first Culianu, who was publishing his first book already, not even books, then slowly books, and his various articles in the scholarly journals around the world. I would get them delivered through his sister, of course, who would receive them immediately upon publication. I had the extraordinary advantage of sometimes seeing manuscripts or typescripts of those unpublished materials, and I was somehow influenced in my own intellectual choices by this very, and I will come to this in our discussion. I will just want to show you this. This is probably the least elegant postcard anyone has ever received in the world. I received it, however, from Paul Feyerabend from the University of California, Berkeley. And this is a direct side effect or direct effect of my interest in Culianu's work. Because I noticed already in the early 1980s, in fact, about 40 years ago, that Feyerabend, whom I knew, whom I had read, was enjoying a totally unexpected and fertile and interesting and engaging reading from Culianu, who himself got to know about Feyerabend in a way by accident while contributing to this famous collective work by Hans-Peter Dürr, the once famous anarchist anthropologist from Germany.
Just a question. So, Feyerabend, they were in contact, Feyerabend, Culianu?
No.
You with?
No.
You with?
I was. No. But after that.
No,
I wouldn't have that. No, reading.
Let's say that I learned about Feyerabend reading Culianu.
No.
So for me,
it was like this.
I got Feyerabend through Culianu.
Yeah. Feyerabend was read even in Romania, of all places, by logicians, philosophers of science, in faculties of philosophy, both in Bucharest and in Iași.
Excuse me. Oh. California. Yeah. You went there after the last years of his life.
Once Feyerabend, because the way I dealt
dated?
Yeah. It is from
dated 22. What year?
87.
87.
Yes. Yeah. But the thing is, I was planning on translating Against Method into Romanian. And I wrote a book review, belated, because of course the book had been published in 75. I was looking into what I thought was still lively and engaging and interesting and puzzling in Feyerabend. And he said, first of all, he sent this immediately after reading that thing. Then we had a long correspondence anyway, but this is not. The thing is that no, but don't do it because I'm publishing the new edition of that, the second edition, which originally I started out to come tonight here with the copies of those books, but they were too heavy to carry. So this is just one example of how someone reading with a certain interest the work of Feyerabend, especially this kind of anarchistic epistemology that Feyerabend was standing for, could inspire work in other fields. Again, as in fact, quite interestingly, Professor Casadio mentioned before we ever met in this contribution to the second edition of the Encyclopedia of Religion, published in 2005, so I assume this was written in 2004, or if not
it was in 2003, in fact.
Most likely. In 2003, he wrote this, which is a contribution from pages 10,041 to 10,044 and counting, because there is a long bibliography. He was looking at the innovation, novelty, revolution possible in the field of the history of religion. And he was already in that article, where encyclopedia entry, Professor Casadio was looking at what was new at the time, 2003, let's say early 2000, early to mid 2000s. what was new? Feminist approaches, and he goes on and critically revisits them, introduces them and critically revisits them. Then post-colonial approaches, he goes on through this. Then he looks at sociobiological approaches following this revival of biology everywhere in the humanities.
Neo-Darwinism.
Of course, because after Nazism, nobody had ever had the courage, especially in Germany, to even mention the word biology or genetics, because they would be immediately blamed, censored, stigmatized for being a kind of post-Nazis. And then he ends this kind of critical review of novelties in the history of religions with a very interesting part on the cognitive approaches to religion. And he goes on and introduces what has in the meantime become known as CSR, the cognitive study of religion. On this, we had a very interesting presentation in our colloquium by Professor Mircea Dumitru, and in the volume I'm preparing for an international publisher to be published next year, this connection, which is yet to be detailed, between what Culianu was already somehow guessing, experimenting with, looking into, that is the cognitive turn, and the parallel developments with Culianu's own inquiries, and then later on what came of it with the cognitive approaches. Now, to look into this, of course, I collected shorter pieces, articles, book projects, collective encyclopedias, collective book projects that Culianu has left behind with Mona Antohi. And this is the second edition of this book, Jocurile Minții, Games of the Mind, in which, and in the introduction, I look at the history of ideas, theory of culture, epistemology, precisely in order to pick up exactly those aspects in Culianu's work that are most likely to interest people outside the very narrow, well, it's wide, but still highly specialized field of the history of religions. Now, whatever has ever been written by Culianu and on Culianu, you find here. The titles are here. This is the bibliography that was just recently published with Polyrom. Was done in about 6-7 years of hard work by Elena Bondor. In the first volume, we have the work of Culianu in various languages, translations, everything from his very first. And in the second, Receptarea, the reception of his work, books by articles and so forth on. Now, I turn to Giovanni Casadio. He has met, actually, Ioan Petru Culianu. They were both young, and they were pretty much under the, let's say, symbolic umbrella of Ugo Bianchi in Milan. How was it? How was your first encounter?
No, but first I want to make something which is possibly amusing. When I worn this scarf, I didn't want to think of that. Then I noticed that it is the same scarf, very similar to the scarf which it was worn by Culianu in one of his last photos. You find this is a book by Tarant, similar colors, really. Possibly because he was Italian in a way, like me. Of course, he was much more elegant in the latest part of his life.
That's right.
Exactly, to come to the question deposited by Sonia Tocchi. The first time this is visible in the photo that I gave to you and distributed in Yashi. His fashion, his appeal was quite different. It was really, it's incredible. His beard was not shaved at all. It was very roughly shaved, his hair, and he was really skinny, like a girl. It was just bones, because he had suffered first before in Bucharest when he was doing the diet in the Via Turda in Bucharest. I don't know exactly what is Via Turda, Strada Turda. And then he had to suffer the Italian treatments in 2 concentration lagers in Trieste and in Latina. Even not only his appearance.
Technically refugee camps. They were
refugees.
The business of concentration
the same
camps
as now. So now they come from Africa. No, from Romania, different. They come a lot. We have 3 million Romanians in Italy, but they live there. So the first time I met him, as I've told, more than twice told tale, in 4 languages, in 7 publications, I think. I met him in October 79 in Rome, and then in Austria. We spent an entire week together, not always together. It was just 3 months after the publication in Italy of famigerato, in English, notorious book, Cultura di Destra by Furio Iesi. The point is that I was fascinated by him. For me, it was my first international conference. No, in fact, it was my first conference because, I just so we were born in the same year, but he was my elder of exactly 11 months, 5 of January, 6 of December. But in maturity, in human maturity, in of course academic maturity, in career, he was approximately 10 years older than me, because I was still a postgraduate. He had already got his BA, in Rome. Not a question of BA. He had got 2 lauree, one in Milano and the first one, of course, in Bucharest. And me had not yet finished my thesis di laurea. And so we were many savants, famous scholars, Robert Turcan, Hank Fershnell. Cannot imagine that conference, including, of course, Ugo Bianchi was a convener. But I was fascinated by him as a person, yes. Like Elimir Zola and Grazia Marchiano, he had this kind of glamour. Even at the time, he was not handsome like he used to be later, but he has this kind of charm, a charm. And so I wish to speak with him more, but I had the occasion to speak for 1 hour. We were in the bus leading us from Rome to Ostia to visit excavations. And when I want to tell again what we said there. And then we met 2 or 3 times. One thing, just kind of gossip, because I know that you've written to Bruce Lincoln, you have an exchange. Me too, I used to write to Bruce Lincoln. Well, that's interesting, this connection. Another question. In the introduction by Mircea Eliade to the famous monograph published by Culianu in 1978 with Cittadella Assisi Publishing, Eliade writes, it was a letter that Culianu used as introduction, as preface. He said, "You and Bruce Lincoln are my only real students, pupils, because in fact, they are very comparative scholars." Eliade had 2. I think I've listed at least 25, 30 pupils of him who became famous scholar and leading scholar in their field. But Eliade felt as his students, ideal students, Culianu and Bruce Lincoln. I think that I was thinking last night when I was not sleeping, that during the 7 days, Because I was a kind of spectator, an observer, very curious, like now. Bruce Lincoln and Culianu never talked once together.
Bruce Lincoln was there for the first time in Italy at the invitation of Ioan Petru Culianu.
With his wife.
This was his first trip to Italy.
So anyway, I have my own thoughts.
The letter from Eliade you can find in
the letter from Eliade, exactly, they recently reread on some, because they published recently, not recently, in 2014 by Livio Bordas, more one, 60 letters more than the famous edition Poliron, Dialoghi Interrotti. They speak frequently. There are 2 or 3 mentioning that Culianu writes to Eliade saying that he has met Bruce Lincoln, and there is a reply. Very interesting. But anyway, there was not a real. We'll see. Just these are my guesses. Also something that Bianchi told to me about that great colleague. Really, I don't want to talk about too much. I think we should not to do stick with the Culianu. But Bruce Lincoln, really, in my view, if it is important, is one of the few, one of the greatest scholars in the history of religions living. But there are things quite different from Culianu. Anyway, for myself.
Some of these things will be, in fact, in the open next year with Oxford University Press, in a book written by Bruce Lincoln 3 years ago on Eliade and Culianu.
Looking forward.
The book is, will be published eventually, but there are some copyright problems related to the fact that Bruce Lincoln has collected Eliade's youth letters from the interwar period.
Scripti legionari, so-called.
Yes, and this is the first time they will be collected
and translated
in totality.
Totality.
Well, a totality. Well, anyhow.
There is also a German edition with German translation.
Yes.
Hilary Müller, student of Kurt Rudolph.
Yes. And this is going to be the now for Romanian readers. This is the 4th edition of the monograph of 1978 on Eliade by Culianu, with the paratext, the various related texts that are to it. So you find that vision that Eliade had about the two, about Bruce Lincoln, who had been technically his student at the University of Chicago. This guy coming from the cold, from Romania, Ioan Petru Culianu. Yes.
Perfect. Now, just another anecdote, just about Agora. This trouvaille of mine, to use Breton famous word. Agora was the name of the Romanian journal of the Pribegie, of the exile, where it appeared the last when he was still alive, because I just seen control there, 3 articles appeared, Culianu in Agora. In Lumea Libra, many more. Yeah. But it was that which appeared when he was still alive. And the title, so perhaps there was a connection with your idea in Agora, the public square place in Greece. And where the title was Iliescu the Savior, Mensuitor. I think it was ironic that Savior.
Of course.
The point is that it looks a lot like Mintitor, which means liar. So probably is not the case.
This is only for you.
Of course, only for Italians.
For Italians. Nobody else would ever.
Latin mentire, Mintitor. In Romania, Mensuitor is very. I like these connections.
Wait a minute. I do the same thing when I speak Italian sometimes, because there are some
false friends.
Look, there are false friends. This is a pejorative way of putting it. No. I'll tell you what. These are potentialities, where possible worlds which were never tried before. So let's see that we are exploring by proposing such connections between languages that otherwise wouldn't connect,
Anyway.
or words that otherwise wouldn't connect.
Anyway, just I made me to some guesses, not only me, of course, Pedanton, Teresa Fest. I think it's possible that that article signed his sentence of death. That, with that title, is possible.
You know,
If Iliescu was not able to control the secret services, the Securitate, there were some. Anyway, Teresa, for example, I note in the 3 last pages of the last edition of his biography, reprinted here, he presents the facts very clearly. Calinescu gives another version, and even in that it's interesting, because Calinescu and Teresa had been witnesses. Me, I was alive, but I was not there. Calinescu was in the States, and it's also interesting. He heard about that from Monica Lovinescu, or as is well known, she didn't love so much Culianu, but probably she repented when she heard about that accident. It's well known that there was some misunderstanding in the group. It's always happens there. The Romanian in Paris, they didn't love each other. Mama Liga, all these people. And Monica Lovinescu had some problems with Petru Culianu.
Let's stop a bit to explain. Indeed, Culianu was frequently going to Paris, and like I was to discover only in 1990, between 1990 and 92, it was almost impossible to live in Paris too close to the Romanian community, because the Romanian community, of course, this is an abstract term. There was no community. This was a very, very, how shall I say, fragmented, to put it elegantly, micro-society of people who would otherwise not meet under normal circumstances in the country of origin, but would be prisoners of the otherness of the French, and somehow would be pushed by the general French society into each other's arms, with very mixed results, I have to say. Now, there were the avant-garde survivors. They were the newly converted avant-gardists who had nothing to do with the avant-garde, while young high school students or even university students more seldom, and became avant-gardists in Paris. This was the case of Montmaliga himself, who became close to this while in Paris. This was the case with others.
There was Philippe Lavastine, who was not Romanian, but was very close to the circles. It's well known, it was extreme right.
Of course. Now, their connection to the extreme right, this is a different chapter, longer chapter. But in among themselves, so this was a very, very difficult world to navigate. So Culianu had his share of adventures, misadventures, trial and errors while contacting these people. And it was only natural that Monica Lovinescu and Virgilia Runca, who were more, let's say, withdrawn, who didn't need to socialize that much with the others, who had their own mandate. They were representatives of the a radio that was broadcasting to Romania in Romanian with money from America, and there was very serious censorship on American censorship. They couldn't just say whatever they wanted to say. So in this complex world where Culianu came somehow and was associated with almost exclusively with Eliade, he somehow was carrying the burden of Eliade's own contacts. And this is how I could reconstruct some of Culianu's personal itineraries and connections in Paris by talking to the very same people, to Monica Lovinescu, Virgilia Runca, to Leonid Montmaliga and others. And through them, I found out the complexity and, in fact, the impossibility, to put it clearly, for anyone coming from the code, from Romania, from communist Romania, to actually settle somehow in Paris, to find, a livable modus operandi with the society, the small fragmented society in Paris. And that is something, this is why, in fact, most people, that then there was a generational change. People simply didn't know who was whom, and all these old feuds of the 1930s didn't matter anymore, and that was it. But I would say that the last generation who has experienced this fragmentation and ideological, political, esoteric, spiritualist, etc., complexity of the Romanian exile were people who are now in their late 40s, early 50s, and are now, some of them in the history of religions, some of them have left the field. This is the generation who are in Paris in the 1990s to around the mid 1990s to late 1990s. So if you want, this is the last time the Romanian interwar exile has generated some kind of cultural, ideological, historical response. Later, it was too late. Now, it was just, many of them died, of course, in the late 90s, early 2000s, and simply there was a new, how shall I say, generation gap, which was impossible to cross. But not when Culianu first got there. Okay. Maybe his death has something to do as well. I don't want to talk too much about his death. I'm more into his ideas, but maybe his, how shall I say, a turning point was his arrival in Paris on the doorsteps of all these people with the flag of Mircea Eliade, and that was his doom, I think.
Just to come back to Culianu, I mentioned that detail, not just so because I love gossip, but because as Culianu was able really to raise strong feelings of love, really, of passion, of sympathy, he was able, in the same way, and possibly in the same quantity relatively, to raise feelings of, don't say hatred, but antipathy, really. That's, for a scholar lives in a human milieu too, and this was, he had to fight for his career because he was never the same. So, in Paris, for example, Monica Minescu, and this depends because from the political point of view, they were both liberal democratic, but there was something between him and Monica Minescu possibly was more closer to Eliade than they thought that Culianu had to be. In Italy, we had Cristiano Gortanelli, which was a kind of twin of Bruce Lincoln, and very close to me for at least 8 years. So I've confessed by him, which is not really positive about Culianu. And both used to go to Chicago as visiting fellows or visiting professors. In Chicago, and Livio Bodas knows this much better than me, there was, of course, Wendy Doniger, the key woman, the key person. Before there were Kawabata, there were also, of course, there was Jonathan Zitter-Smith. We know a lot of, thanks to the letters published by Bodas, even others, even my own experience in the house of Grottanelli, Jonathan Smith was not at all sympathetic. Jonathan Smith, no less, that is a kind of mantra man for all the American, North American scholars, even for some Italians now. He was not at all favorable to Culianu. Before, he was not a key person because he was just professor in the college, not in the school, in the graduate school. But every time refused any article of Culianu in History of Religions. And Cristiano, I remember Cristiano said, he was very proud of that. Eliade, on whom later Cristiano Grottanelli wrote 3 terrible articles in French, in Italian, and in English. Cristiano Grottanelli was proud, he took pride of that, he published 2 articles in History of Religions, and Culianu solo recensioni, only reviews, and there was a reason behind. He tried to do that, same as he tried with Nume, but they were opposers. So he was able to really to raise. The case of Wendy Downing is still open because he's still alive. The others died. To really, I remember a very, very influential professor, Mauro in Italian, a professor, outgoing past professor of history of Christianity, Mauro Pesce, I can give the name, born in 1941. When I met him in Bologna, I think in 86, he told me, Culianu, ma quanto antipatico! And I consider him, has been most influential Italian scholar of history of Christianity, very famous in the United States because he was able to collect a group to the American, and then the SBL, Society of Biblical Literature, in fact, is connected to American Academy of Literature, not religion, not literature. The entire group of philologists, Italian and Swiss, considered, I don't want to give another name, other names, they are serious, considered what Culianu had written on Gnosticism, his first book about experience d'extase, French origin edition, and of course the twin book in English, Psychanodia, published 1 year before in 83, and then Les Mythes Dualistes, not published in French in 88, because it appeared with some ways of Payot, the problems with Payot publishing house. It appeared in Italian, in translation by Cosi and Saibene in 89. They consider this book quite feuilleton, something like that. It was an exaggeration. But there was some reason. Culianu, because we come to Culianu in my view, of course, as a scholar, he was able to make really scholarly work, of course, because he had a philologic education. Even second-hand Greek, he started with Pogirka, and then in Milano, Sanskrit studied before with Sergio Algeorge, with that scholar from Hyderabad, and he studied Coptic. He also got a degree with Lutikoisen and van der Velde in Groningen. But when you check his quotes from Greek texts and Latin texts in these books, myself I found some. The point is that he was very near to be a Superman, but when you write the computer, as he writes in the introduction to the French and even the Italian and the English edition of the Tree of Gnosis, you sleep 4 hours a night and you stay at the computer for the rest of the day. He was a Superman, but fallibile summus.
Eliade slept very little as well. He didn't have a computer at least. So.
Yeah, then Eliade had to stop. He used to sleep 3 hours a night. Yeah. And of course with the computer it's much easier. But anyway, I stopped. If you have some questions, I stopped to say, because if he would talk about me and Culianu, he would speak for 2 hours.
I know.
Please.
I know,
Don't stop with that.
No.
Pose some questions, other questions.
I'm just making... was this mostly a personal reaction, or was it combined with some form of scholarly... So was it personal, that is from antipathy to envy to jealousy?
Both. No, still now even worse. Even the academy does not accept it's right. The fortunes, for example, in France, but even in the state, because they call it religious studies. But the real scholars of history of religion, so scholars of religion. Now it's very popular, the scholar, for example, in the latest article by my friend Amiguel, scholars of cognitive science of religion. See, now there's a new tribe, the scholar of the cognitive science of religion. About that,
CSR.
So,
But he was a pioneer.
They don't accept. In Italy, like in Italy, still we have 20 chairs, almost quasi chairs of history. In France, we don't have one. There are only 2 or 3 in Strasbourg because of the German tradition, the Faculté de Théologie catholique, the Faculté de Théologie protestant, and the Faculté des Lettres. But there are no historical religions. So it's been eliminated. In Germany, there are still people who do that way. But really, to make history of religions in the way which was founded and even practiced by Raffaele Pettazzoni, Mio Cegliale, and even Jonathan Zitter-Smith and Bruce Lincoln, one of the few. It's it's considered more than utopia. It's considered a failure. It's considered a bad challenge. So 55% of the philologists, philological historians, which is a great tribe, the domination tribe, consider issue of religions a total failure. They consider us as primitive men may have same situation in Salerno.
But in the wrong Culianu, way, primitive way, but in a pejorative way.
Of course, primitive, not the right word, primitive. Daydreamers, faith scholars, you are not able to make an edition of that important fact. They asked me when I was doing the doctorate on storia religiosa. Since I was unable, I started with Jaspers, the famous accent fight, and the supervisor of the entire doctorate, Professor Franco Bolgiani. It's interesting because he published an article of Culianu in the jury, but he refused mine later for other reasons, not because it was not philological. So he said, accent, I know only the axis of the carriage. Of course, Jasper's famous accent side, but it's been very fertile accent. It's not poor history, but to talk about, Eisenstadt,
of course, but in historical studies,
it's inspiring to talk about this accent side. It doesn't mean that Buddha and Moses were connected in a special way, but but this is refused by historical mainstream historians. Refuse this.
No, I tell you what I was reading. What my reaction was when I was trying to read more technical works in the theory of the history of religions, because I had a very serious base in the theory and philosophy of history, and I was looking at this as a particular instance in which someone is looking at a particular fragment of history. So I was amazed by the very modest historical, philosophical background of most of these people who are doing. They had, in most cases, a good philological background, and the kind of historicist there is, a very particularistic form of theory of history they knew about, but they knew nothing else. And how do I know they didn't know? There was no mention to the debates in the philosophy and theory of history in general whatsoever. So I could see a field that was going on in its way, feeding on its own tradition, which is very nice, but with absolutely no interest in the theory of history, which nonetheless is the field where historical thinking, historicity, is thought about, is discussed theoretically. So I was quite amazed. This is why when I first read your contribution to the Encyclopedia of Religion, I was struck both by the presence of Feyerabend. There are two main references towards the end of the article, which are, in fact, Giovanni Casadio says unconclusion, not conclusion, because of course he doesn't.
Hayden White.
Of course. So yes, the second is Hayden White. So
it was a challenge. Because I never seen mentioned in all even the theoretical works I read before. Never seen mentioned one time Feyerabend and Idei. And the wine I had from a German professor, who was in fact a friend of Culianu in Groningen, Hans-Gerd Kippenberg.
Yes.
He presented in Germany, because I was in Germany, Idei. He made to us a presentation of 1 or 2 hours. Kippenberg.
Yes, that's what Kippenberg. No, of course, I know.
And also, of course, he had also a sociological institution. There was in Germany, there was Max Weber, and in France.
Too bad, because Hayden White was spending much more time in Italy than in Germany, which he really didn't like that much.
He was convinced by meta history. I remember in Frankfurt, perhaps. He said, now we have to stop to walk like before to think that this is true, this is not true. I was tantalized.
Meta history in 1973.
I went to the library to buy it in white. No, I ordered them by Blackwell, my bookseller in Oxford. I ordered meta history. And then
a beautiful green book, but thick. The thing is that I'll tell you why. That is quite funny, because in Italy, of all places, they should have been more capable than others to relate to Hayden White, because Hayden White's, if you want, seminal influence that he was engaging was Giambattista Vico, and whatever goes with that. There is most literary scholars to whom I was trying to push Hayden White in the 1980s, Romania. And I tried this, I tried this, and of course I failed miserably. I knew many people who are in literary theory, and I thought, look, if you think you read literary theory, try this. They misunderstood completely. They couldn't get the point that Hayden White was not deriving from deconstructivists. He was not yet another addition to the post-structuralist, whatever, to the French theory, as it were, albeit from the 1970s. No, he was coming from a completely different direction, and that was Vico, through his studies, very serious studies of diplomatics. That is paleography, medieval texts, theories of text, and
documents.
So forth. This is why he was an extremely, how shall I say, dedicated reader of abstruse medieval texts that, require a consummate philologist to even start reading them or engaging them. And of course, they missed the point. And I would say that in a way, I would put it this way, from my viewpoint. History of religions was weak in the sense of discussing historicity theoretically, was not up to it. I mean, as far as I tried to read, to me, they were engaging in really petty, marginal debates, and far remote from the serious discussions in the philosophy of history. That's one thing. And when, since they were like that, they immediately embarked in the cultural studies version of the history of religions, which I think was the end of it, when everything was, fragmented, and this is when Culianu joined the guild.
The guild.
When everything was collapsing.
He was totally independent from the guild.
Yes.
And so it was accepted and not accepted. Of course, we are not prophets. The story non si fa con i sé. If you've not died, there would be some explosion in North America. I say North America because Canada is very influenced in theorizing. In the Department of Religious Studies in Chicago is different. In Chicago is different because the school includes also real, not just religious studies scholars, but Indologists, scholars, Sanskrit scholars, Christianity, which have a strictly, closely philological education, even in Europe. Paris and other places.
And serious comparative philological background.
The school. And comparative, that was in the past, in the lucky past.
Yes.
After when the Dorning got, but modern comparative
up to
psychoanalytic.
Up to the generation of
now
Lincoln.
Bruce Lincoln retired 5 years ago. Bruce retired. Don't know the real reasons. Wendy Dorning, she still, Livio says she's still there, because he's a special endowed chair, but in fact he's no more in the editorship of the journal, which is the flagship of the Divinity School, History of Religions. And I used to read every 3 months History of Religions, never find something used to do with old-fashioned history of religion, comparative style, with so-called historical deposit. Just that, Imechinsky has stressed that 2 or 3 times in the introduction also to the Polyrome edition of the Gnostic Iter in Civis second or first. Bianchi, our common mentor, loved by both of us. And this year is the year of the
centennial.
Exactly, centennial. Yes. Before leaving, there was. Before leaving for Bucharest, there was a centennial, the 23, I think 23. In this moment, I forgot. Bianchi liked to talk about, this form was well known to Culianu, of historical typologies. And every time he said, there's nothing to do with maybe ideal types, ideal type. Because, of course, Bianchi has his own way, very Thomistic, of explaining how a typology can be historical at the same time to be typology. Of course, historicists, even Homo Deo, when he addressed Raffaele Petersoni, Homo Deo has been a great Italian historian, typical. He was a graduate of Giovanni Gentile, and then he became more even politically close to Benedetto Croce. So he's a real representative of historicism in historical sciences. Homo Deo said that it was impossible to make any typology, to make any science of religion based on a comparative approach, because the famous argument that every historical event is individual and uncomparable. It cannot be put on the same way with others taking place in another place, in another time, etc., etc. But in this moment, the adversaries, the enemies of the historical comparative method, they are winning. Because it's very difficult. I should mention that in his perhaps last article published in a scholarly book, not a polemic in Lumea Libera, in Agora, or even others. No, I think really the last, because he died, they had to correct the proofs. His article about Ugo Bianchi and the magic in the festival for Ugo Bianchi, Agatel Peace. He starts the first 2 paragraphs saying that history of religion is a discipline which is near to die. It still exists only in Italy.
Yes,
in the school of Angelo Bredic, of course, Ugo Bianchi, etc. I was thinking, I must say, to me too, because yes, just to come to that, in 1990, I had 2 last decisive letters from Culianu. I distributed all in the copies. And Culianu, we were feeling much more close than before, because me, I was not at all a professor, was not a member of any academic guild. Yes, a guild of history of religion, thanks to the influence of my mentorship of Bianchi, but I had no position at the time. And he was really, I had to, on the human level, I had to thank him immensely, as it is having from Berlin. He encouraged me, because, for some personal reason, I was not able to finish my graduation in time. And he every time encouraged me. And of course, I suffered when I didn't receive letters from him for 2 or 3 years, but it was obvious. He had to write all these books. He had to write the letters to Mircea Eliade. Really, sometimes it's incredible. Kilometers long. So both had a lot of pages, but Eliade had more pages. Everything he writes, everything he thinks, he explains, he exposes with details to Mircea Eliade. And one of these, which is for me is really important, because another trial I met yesterday when I was strolling in Lipscani. This comes from reading, before leaving, I read the letters, the unpublished, not published before in the Polyron book, letters edited of, especially of Eliade, no, Culianu to Eliade, published in the journal Studi di Storia Filosofiche by Livio Bordas, the issue in 2014. There, starting from a footnote by Livio Bordas, really, and I forgot that, and so I thought it was my or that I found somewhere else. It's possible. That's for me. It's important because really, I still think that a historian must use philological arguments. That is, when we find the origin of Gnosticism, the origin of something on the way, have one new idea developed, even historiographic ideas. We have not to use our own imagination. The imagination later, at first we have to start for documents, sources. So, it is possible that, I read because I just wrote this before coming here, it is possible that Culianu, that's the reason why Culianu is so important, is because of the famous anticipation of the cognitive science of religion. It's possible that Culianu got some inspiration to his theory. I would prefer to call it mental turn, because it's so popular now to talk about of linguistic turn among postmodern, even non-postmodern. It's a mental turn, in fact, starting from Berkeley. In fact, it's not so new. In the study of, it's new for the study of religion, of course, because I've also reconstructed the chronology. I remember I talked with our Mircea Domit about that. Culianu anticipated 1 or 2 years, even Ioan was not published. The first article speaks explicitly of cognitive science in that of Stuart Guthrie, 84, and Ioan was written 82, 83, and non-published. So this mental time, the study of religion and magic, is distinguished. Now it's very popular fashion to say there is no distinction between religion and magic. For Culianu, there was a distinction because he planned the history of magic, not the history of religion, and the history of mind before dying, from the Buddhist Mahayana school denominated Yogacara. Yogacara, of course, is to do with yoga. And another name of this important sect dated in the 3rd until the 8th century of the Common Era. So it's a Mahayana, it's not Theravada. Another name is Chitta Matra, which means mind only. Obviously, Buddhists always talk about mind, but this school in particular has its first or second name, mind only, and of course it was a part of Buddhist yoga. Yogacara means the practice of yoga. So it was on the practical side, the practice of yoga, Yogacara. On the theoretical side, the fact that considered everything is only mind is a real mover. The rest is trifle. So, We know that Culianu, in fact, followed courses of Indian philosophy at the University of Brookes, blah, blah, because we have to reconstruct this, not just so an idea, with Professor Sergio Algeorgi during his academic year 1971-72 for entire seminars, and even as an Indian scholar and another professor. It was his first idea of start even reading Eliade, even, you know, there's a country, sometimes says, you are my mother, I go, and another letter he writes, I don't want to follow your way, eater in India as you did. But in fact, his first religious texts were Buddhist texts, or in general, Hindu texts. So his first project, that's well known, his first project of thesis at the Cattolica with Ugo Bianchi was, this is witnessed by letters mentioned by Teresa Culianu, but even I read until published a letter, in the letters to Bianchi and the answers by Bianchi, it is clear the proposed thesis, the first month he came to Milano after I have gained that scholarship is Buddhist psychology and depth psychology. Bianchi said, what to do? I'm not interested in that. And so the thesis was transformed, this of course signed the destiny of him, Gnosticism in the vision of Hans Jonas. Okay, so, finito. No, nothing. So I think it's important that this comes not just, of course, Raimondo Lull, or this itinerary, is blood coming from professor of mathematics, physics, chemists, why not? But reading these Buddhist texts, I think it was important to develop this mental
absolutely.
approach.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Buddhist.
So, in a way, the last.
We are not called Buddhist. You are not called Buddhist. Me
not yet. Well, let's be hopeful.
Have you read the Tripitaka?
Yes, but I didn't.
Not
I
yet.
was not convinced.
Not yet.
I'm not convinced. The thing is, so the last Culianu is also the first Culianu because he was starting out here under the absolute spell of Eliade, of course. He first tried his hand at Romanian, Southeastern European folklore, like every other philology student in Romania, especially from the Department of Romanian Literature. We're studying firstly Romanian and with another language like Italian in his case. But this was, everybody was looking into the folklore, following in many ways Eliade, but following other leads as well. So this was his main thing. But also in Eliade, this infatuation with India, which had been there for decades already, he got to Italy and he thought that this was the place where he would flourish, where he would do this kind of. This is why, but he didn't meet Grazia Marchiano. That would have been his good encounter in Italy if he wanted to, and the other people around her.
In 87.
Yes, these guys who are studying Hindu religions. But he went to Bianchi, and then Bianchi, of course, was not happy. And maybe one could say that the Christian Kabbalah and then interesting in Lulus and Kabbalah in general brought him back to this, not a mental turn, but a mentalist turn.
Mentalist, of course.
That is going into a radical version of the mental turn, and then somehow rediscovering. I think evidence of that can be also found in his very, very last book, which is Out of This World. If you look at the ways in which otherworldly post-worlds are depicted in various, he is interested in every one of those, and he describes them technically, albeit succinctly, but clearly technically correct, with a minimum of critical apparatus, which could be developed as, in fact, Andrei Oișteanu has done in the Romanian version, which was done by his late wife, Angela Oișteanu. Andrei Oișteanu contributed a longer, let's say, an additional critical apparatus, adding more footnotes to Out of This World. So the Romanian edition, in many ways, and the preface are more, how shall I say, closer to scholarship than the Shambhala edition in English. Okay, I think we open the floor a little bit for those who want to raise questions or add something, such as, for instance, Liviu Bordaș. He was very quiet all night, all this evening. Maybe you have something you want to add something, Liviu?
Come here.
If you want, come here.
Goodness.
You don't want. Liviu is, of course, no. He can be radical, but in writing. So we can wait for him to write something about it.
Of course. I'm kind of documenting myself from my phone, so I'm not really in the field, but I was wondering what is this group of 7? Because you spoke about someone, Doril, I'm not sure if that's the Liviu you're mentioning. What is a group of 7 in which Culianu was?
Yeah. But this is. Yeah. This was his. This was the countercultural hippie a la Roumaine in the 1960s before he left. He came.
It was not related to his preoccupations.
It was related to his life. He came here in 1967, a guy of 17, and then he got to know, whatever there was in Bucharest in terms of counterculture. So from 67 to 1972, he was friends with a list of people, there are more than 7, who were doing all kinds of things. One of the things they were doing, for instance, was to emulate American folk music and American folk culture, counterculture, and use Romanian materials to illustrate that. And of course, some were better at it than others. How shall I put it? The larger audiences in Romania mostly knew the more, let's say, popular and more accessible version of that counterculture through the music of Phoenix, of Nicu Kovac and the band. There is some at closer level to the music of Mircea Florian, who lived long enough to become famous and then be recorded and be enjoyed by maybe 2 generations. But these people, Dorin Liviu Zaharia and others, only Zaharia in this was a poet and songwriter, very much in the tradition that one had in the United States at the time. Now, for those of you who are younger and those of you like me who are older, this cultural transfer failed in Romania, I have to say, because then, it didn't come with its political, cultural message. That didn't cross the border. So the aesthetic program did cross the border, but the rest did not. These are people on the left, liberal, wild, bohemian, countercultural, drug, everything, any form of liberation. This was, first of all, not possible in Romania, and for reasons that we know, and I would also think was not really intelligible. with it at the same time, and maybe if we talk in these terms of counterculture, one should know that there was like in the United States in the 1960s and like in Western Europe in the 1960s, but I mentioned the United States because they started early, in really early 1960s, 61, 62 already. There was also a stream of, let's say, countercultural neo-esotericism and neo-occultism, which benefited the reception of Eliade's work greatly. And of other European authors such as Hesse, were people like that. Usually German and, well, European in general. Well, Guénon got to the United States after the war at about that time. And I mean, this kind of horizon was also prepared by by European refugees. Whenever I want to say Western, I remind myself of Culianu, of course, of Eliade. These went to the United States, wanted to forget and have everybody else forget their youth. That is, their infatuation with the right-wing and right-wing ideologies and cultural fashions. But they somehow transferred, although they were hiding this very carefully under the slogan of post-histoire, they somehow transferred to the United States forms of spirituality and anti-modernism that were later to flourish under the guise of New Age. And they got imported back into Europe years later. In Romania, this happened more or less simultaneously. And that, I think, is the interesting thing. Not that the Romanians in question would understand it. They didn't have the... Some did, some... Because they would, for instance, run into some wild esotericists like, there were people like that in Romania. Gabriel Andrescu knows what I'm talking about. If you think of Culianu and Idei Petru going hand in hand or almost to Sinaia to talk to the rising guru, countercultural esotericist guru at the time, and we know whom we are talking about. So these are very, how shall I say, these are fateful years because this kind of relative openness, how shall I say, allowed for a kind of not free, but more freer interaction also between generations, because there was a cultural memory of interwar. In 1967, it was just 22 years, or 20 years after 1947. So remember this kind of time frame, right? So 20 years later. 1989 was 33 years later, and I still remember it vividly, right? So it was a very interesting survival, which became even more present in society after the liberation of political prisoners in 1964, most massively. It was a acculturation of the Romanian society with these people who had studied, enjoyed, followed forms of spirituality and religiosity. And it is also against this background, Giovanni, that Ioan Petru Culianu was growing up. So when he went there to Italy, he, of course, was infatuated with Buddhism and so forth, but he was also very cognizant of all the esotericisms and parallel occultisms and everything that you want. which were
Livio Botta's written very important article in
which
English,
were
really about the functions of yoga in the Indian philosophy, Indian practice in Romania.
but
So start from that.
But also everything else. I mean, I mentioned Guénon just en passant because it was a long list.
Guénon, of course, is with Claudio Mutti. Guénon sul fronte dell'est.
Yes.
Very popular. Guénon, of course, because it was Balsan, there was Lovinescu, of course.
And so all these traditions had been somehow under the surface, had been buried somehow, but they are now coming in semi-private milieus. Of course, not on the first page of the party.
They were the
daily.
years of the contestazione.
Yes.
Carlos Castaneda in California.
But these people, the Castaneda and the other guys, Fitio Capra and so forth, those closer to the sciences, who were unintelligible to most humanists. I mean, people with studies in the humanities, in philology and all that, simply because they talk about physics too much.
Tao della fisica.
These people came, paradoxically enough, with the very strong education in the sciences of several generations in communist Romania, which somehow generated as an unintended consequence an interest for something spiritual. And then guess what? Suddenly you find out zillions of physicists. Gabriel Andrescu cannot prove me wrong because he was going through this process of people studying hard sciences and being on a quest for something deeper, higher, other, which was in this kind of spirituality. So this adds to the, so I would say that, to call it a day soon, I would say that Culianu went to the West also with this kind of countercultural baggage and also with this kind of revival of interwar anti-modern spiritualities. So he was carrying with him all that. And then when he landed on the shores of the Bel Paese, then he found a world which he simply couldn't relate to. Giovanni Casadio.
When he was in Milan, I think he was not spending so much time thinking of the counterculture. He was only studying. And of course, for him, the problem was Italian communism at the time.
Of course.
He was more afraid than me because he really, in fact, didn't know the Italians. Italia played with those parole d'ordine.
But he took them seriously.
The one of the two reasons he moved was, of course, the salary, which was bigger than the scholarship in Milan. He moved to the night was because he was afraid that the communists were taking the power in a few months.
Yes. You know, the
Soviet Union coming to him.
The Soviet Union was still paying, you know, so
nobody thought that. I mean, several people, but not me. I mean, nobody with...
I read a good history of the Italian Communist Party by an Italian scholar who managed to prove that the moment money stopped coming from Moscow, that is, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Communist Party.
The time of Prague Revolution. Czech Revolution.
One last point I want to make. Eliade, there is this new edition from Cartex 2000 of La Țigăni, Novele Fantastice, which has a very, very, very interesting preface by Giovanni Casadio, in which he answered to my secular, unheard prayers. Namely, he distanced himself in interpreting these novels, these texts, these prose stories, from two of the most important trends in Eliade scholarship, which is biographism, to see everything in it as a kind of, and then an excessive and failed reading through the lens of mythology, history of religion, of Eliade's profession.
To find symbols everywhere.
Eliade, the prose writer, fell prey to both his biography and his profession. For these people who are reading too much of both, or either in any of their and then I think Giovanni Casadio tells us how to read the Eliade properly. That is, in his own right, take the text, look into them, and take them as they are. And by the way, in this he meets Eliade, because Eliade was recommending exactly the same kind of reading. Giovanni Casadio, thank you very much. Mille grazie, professore, commendatore.
Cu piacere.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Acum vorbim roman.
Acum vorbim limba strămoșilor noștri și
Da,
anume
vorbim
Getodaca.